After, let's call it, technical difficulties, we're back. And, let's call it technical difficulties. I guess we can continue right where we left off then. Yeah, let's just, get right back into it, huh? Okay, so I'll start right here. I know we already read this in part one, but whatever. Along with the addition of Soumaya, I had two new nannies. The first nanny was a French woman named Celine, though she was only with us for a brief period, so I don't remember much of her. My second nanny was a German woman named Christine. Christine would stay with us for a year, and I became very fond of her. She would always look after me during my time at father's house, and whenever I went on my adventures into the hills, she always accompanied me. Halloween this year marked my first time going trick or treating. My mother took me to my friend Shane's house, and we walked around his neighborhood collecting candy. Still obsessed with dinosaurs, I dressed up as a dinosaur for that Halloween. Trick or treating was a new thing for me, as it wasn't so popular in England. When it was all over, I was amazed that I had so much candy. Even though James Ellis no longer went to Topanga Elementary, he was still my best friend, and I saw him a lot. My mother would take us to his house in the Palisades almost every week, where I would play with James, and Georgia would play with James's sister, Sage. He got me interested in a new phenomenon that gripped many children of the era, Pokemon. Oh boy. Time for the Pokemon chapter of his life. When I got my first Game Boy console, I started playing Pokemon Red version, and I was hooked instantly. Then I then started collecting Pokemon cards, and James and I always compared and traded them. The Pokemon anime cartoon became my favorite show on television. It was a very fun, captivating hobby, and every boy at my school had a folder of Pokemon cards. It provided something to have, something to show off, something to talk about. The best cards were the shinies, and everyone coveted them. To get off topic for a second here, me personally, I remember my first Pokemon game too. It was Pokemon Sapphire, and my uncle got it for me from I guess you could call it pawn shop. I don't know if that's exactly the most accurate term for it, but let's go with that. Pawn shop. Uh, yeah. So, I remember it was back when I was first carrying around it was back when I was still carrying around a Game Boy Advance SP everywhere I went. And I'm going to be getting into this in my upcoming Pokemon fan games videos. I will be talking about this a bit, but yeah. I remember Pokemon Sapphire being my first game and I had a lot of good memories with it. I don't think I beat it, but I did get kind of far, which was pretty good for, I think 5 or 6 year old me. I don't exactly remember when this happened, but I do remember it, like the event itself. But my mother was still friends with George Lucas, so we got invites to the red carpet premiere of Star Wars Episode 1. I always was and always will be a huge Star Wars fan. I had already seen the original trilogy many times, and considered myself very lucky to be able to go to the premiere of the new Star Wars movie. It was an absolutely astonishing experience. It was just me and my mother. Georgia was too young, so she stayed at home with a babysitter. Episode 1 is infamous for being the. Sorry. Episode 1 is infamous for being the lesser movie of the three new prequels, but as a kid, I enjoyed it very much. Afterwards, I met some of the actors, and I shook the hand of Jake Lloyd, the actor who played Anakin Skywalker in the movie. My second grade year flew by like a breeze. I don't remember much of it, but I did have a blast. During recess and lunch, I played a lot with Shane and Tommy. We would play Pokemon on our Game Boys, and sometimes we would have play dates where we played Nintendo 64 games such as Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64, and Donkey Kong 64. I failed in my goal of never having to change my card, which really disappointed me. I went through most of the year without changing my card, But right when the year was about to end, I was caught talking in class with a friend named Danny Dayani, who sat next to me, and I had to change my card to yellow. I blamed Danny for it, because he was always talking in class, but I still had to change my card. After a fast and fantastic year, summer came quickly, and with it my 8th birthday. My 8th birthday was mellow but pleasant. I remember my mother inviting a few of my friends from my 2nd grade class, and we had a cake. During my weekend at Father's house, we all went to the restaurant Typhoon in Santa Monica to celebrate it. It was quite a fancy restaurant next to a small airport, and they had a lot of exotic dishes that I tried. 8 years old. As I was now 8 years old, Father decided that I was old enough to climb Big Rock. Whenever I was at Father's house, I would always see Big Rock looming in the distance, and I was just itching to climb it. I had already conquered every other rock in the area. There was only Big Rock left. And so I set out with Father and a few of Father's friends to finally climb to the top. The furthest I had climbed on this rock was about halfway up with Christine. There was a very steep rise which I wasn't able to ascend without some help. The second half of the journey was quite a challenge, but it was so exhilarating. I was very nervous the higher we climbed. The best part, of course, was reaching the top, and the sense of accomplishment I felt. I finally did it! Looking down, I could see the vastness of the old Topanga Canyon region, and Father's house looked tiny down there. I was too scared to venture close to the edge, and I felt a sense of dread at the prospect of falling from such a height. The way down was even more challenging, but I felt so proud of myself for climbing that rock that it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. I was very excited to start 3rd grade. As 3rd graders, we now got to play in the upper playground of Topanga Elementary, and I considered myself one of the big kids. The upper was vast, with a bigger playground, more handball courts, and 4 basketball courts. My classroom was located in a bungalow adjacent to the upper, and my teacher was named Mrs. Bunton. She was a young teacher. I believe she was in her late 20s. Being used to having very old teachers, I was surprised at how young my new teacher appeared. I continued to play with the same friends during recess and lunch, where we would spend our time comparing and trading Pokemon cards. In the midst of elementary school, I didn't interact with girls much, but this was normal. It was at that period of life where the boys played with the boys and the girls played with the girls, completely separate from each other. Girls were the last thing on my mind. Maddie was still the only friend I had who was a girl, and I only saw her on the occasions when our families would have a get-together, which became more and more rare after Maddie's parents divorced and Paul Humphreys moved back to England. It was as if the girls in elementary school were part of a separate reality. Despite not having much interaction with them, they treated me cordially, as they treated all other boys of my age. This was fair, and I was content with this. I hadn't gone through puberty yet, and so I had no desire for female validation. My 8-year-old self had no inkling of the pain and misery girls would cause me once puberty would inevitably arrive and my sexual desires for girls would develop. Here we go again with the melodrama. Sexual desires that would be mercilessly spurned. Some of the boys in my class would grow up to be embraced by girls, while I would grow up to be rejected by them. But at that moment in time, we were just innocent children growing up together. All innocence is destined to be shattered and replaced with bitter brutality. I was living in ignorant, innocent bliss, and I was happy with it. This period of my life, aside from my early childhood in England, was one of the best periods. Life was fair and life was satisfying. As kids, proving our self-worth and gaining validation among our peers was achieved in a fair manner, by how good we were at the games we played, or how big our collection of Pokemon cards were. No one had unfair advantages. This was perfect, and this is how life should be. And boy, did I have a lot of fun. James's family had to move to yet another house in the Palisades, and Mother would always take us there. She became great friends with James's parents, Kim and Artie. James and I would battle on our Game Boys, trade Pokemon cards, and walk to the recreation center down the street to play in the pool, and then for dinner we would all go to the restaurant Mott's in the center of the Palisades. I was quite proud of my collection of Pokemon cards. I had gained a few shinies over the last few months, and I enjoyed showing them off to other boys. Shiny cards came randomly in card packets our parents would buy for us. The card that I coveted most was the Charizard card. And one morning when my mother opened a packet for me, I looked through all the new cards, and there it was. It felt like the best day ever, and I was swelled with excitement. I jumped up and down all around the Red House, and I couldn't wait to show it to James, who already had a Charizard himself. Through being friends with James Ellis and going to his house a lot, we became acquainted with the Lemelson family, who were family friends of Kim and Artie. The Lemelson family is a very wealthy family who has been financially helping James's family for a while. Rob Lemelson is the son of Jerome Lemelson, the inventor of the barcode, and his net worth is in the 100 millions. Rob's son, Noah, is our age and great friends with James, and eventually I became friends with him too, though we would never be close friends. Sometimes we would all go up to the Lemelson's house, also in the Palisades, and the three of us played together. For Halloween, we went to the Lemelsons for trick-or-treating, and from then on it would become tradition to go trick-or-treating with them. I dressed up like a dinosaur again because I couldn't think of anything else to be. I wanted to dress up as Ash Ketchum from Pokemon, but no store had that costume in stock. The Palisades was full of wealthy families, so the candy they gave us would be in much larger amounts, obviously. I remember competing with James and Noah as to who would get the most candy at the end. Afterwards, we would have dinner at Rob's house, and then we would dump our candy in piles on the floor to examine what we got. That was my favorite part of it. Early in my 3rd grade year, my mother would often take us to a festival near Topanga Canyon Boulevard, where small concerts were held and people barbecued great food. A friend of hers had something to do with these events, and I played with the son of this friend. He was named Riley Anapol, and he was 2 years younger than me, a 1st grader. I played with some other younger kids there as well, peers of Riley, and I had a good time. Riley became a common friend for a while. The significance of this is that Riley Anapol would eventually become someone I would harbor a great hatred for. Riley would grow up to get lots of girls, and I would grow up to be rejected by girls. But back then, he was a friend, a peer, and we were playing together as equals. It's funny how the world works. Yes, Elliot, it's funny how the world works, that he had the balls to go and get what he wanted, while you expected it to be delivered to you on a silver platter. You self-entitled fuck. When the holidays arrived, my father announced that we were going to take a family vacation to Soumaya's home country of Morocco and meet her family there, and afterwards we were to stop by in England. I wasn't too excited about Morocco, since I didn't know much about it except that it was in North Africa, and I wasn't too excited about the fact that we'll be staying there for 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Jesus Christ. For 6 weeks either, which meant that my entire winter break would be spent in a foreign country that I knew nothing about. But of course, I had no choice in the matter, and Morocco was added to the list of the many countries I've been to at such a young age. I looked forward to visiting England afterwards and seeing family there. Morocco was a very strange and foreign to me, even more so than Malaysia, which was more westernized. I found it to be very backwards, though it had a lot of culture and the people were friendly. I remember disliking a lot of the meals, but enjoying the desserts and pastries. Soumaya's parents were divorced, though they lived walking distance from each other in the Kasbah, a historic community located in the center of Tangier. Tangier, whatever the fuck. Soumaya's mother, Khadija, has a small but elegant house, and her father, Abdesalam, that's a mouthful, has a very large, almost castle-like house that is famous for being a location where a scene from James Bond, The Living Daylights, was shot. This fascinated me, as I was a huge James Bond fan at the time. In the center of this house, there was an open courtyard where I always played with a kid named Aman and his two younger brothers. They were adopted by Soumaya's father a few years ago and live with him. After a long stay in Morocco, too long in my opinion, we made our stop in England to visit relatives. We stayed at Grandma Jinx's house, and I was able to play with my cousin George for a few days. On one of the days we stayed in England, my mother's sister, Aunt Min, and my grandma Amma came to visit and brought me a lot of English chocolates, which I relished. All in all, it was a good trip, and I was glad to be able to experience it, though the length of the trip cut into my school schedule, and I missed a couple of weeks of school. After the holiday season, my nanny Christine had to leave back to Germany, and this saddened me deeply. Christine would always be my favorite nanny, and I was in a sullen mood on the day she left. The remainder of my third grade year went by quickly. I continued my Pokemon endeavors, increasing my card collection and progressing on the Game Boy game. I had a conflict with my friend Shane during this time. Because of some arguments we previously had, I started to play a game with him in which he would become my enemy and rival at the school. For me, I was just playing with him, but he took it seriously and the conflict escalated a lot more than I thought it would. We once got into a small physical fight in which I hit him on the arm and was sent to the principal's office. Ooh, you absolute rowdy hellraiser, you. This was the biggest trouble I've been in at Topanga Elementary. This little conflict with Shane lasted for the rest of third grade, but we would later reconcile and play again as friends in fourth grade. Before summer came, my father's spontaneous career as a commercial director took off once again, and he became very successful. At this point, he was probably the most successful he's ever been. With this success, he decided to move to a bigger and better house. After doing some searching, we moved to a house in an upscale area of West Hills, near Woodland Hills. I loved this house at first sight. It had 5 bedrooms, which was more than enough space for our family, along with Uncle Dan, who was still staying with us. It also had a huge swimming pool with a spa, a large grass field to play in, a basketball court, and a nice view of the valley. I was a valley kid again. Despite Father's move to a much larger house and all the benefits that came with it, I still preferred my time at Mother's house, just because of her gentle and fun attitude and the energy of her household. My mother indulged in me more than my father and Soumaya ever did. She knew what I liked and what I didn't like, and she would go out of her way to make my life pleasant and enjoyable. I was quite annoyed with the recent decision between my mother and father to extend my stay at Father's by 2 days of the week. From that point on, me and my sister would only be at Mother's house from Monday to Thursday, and on Thursday night we would go to Father's house until the following Monday. Okay, so Chin made a good effort to make Elliot's life more enjoyable. Translation: she spoiled the fuck out of him and gave him this sense of entitlement. I mean, it was already there to begin with, but she definitely did not help things. My 9th birthday was spent at Father's house, and Father and Soumaya threw a party for me. They invited a few of my friends from Topanga Elementary, though the only friend I remember being there was Philip and his younger brother Jeffrey. James was invited, but he wasn't able to make it. They also invited a few of George's friends, which really annoyed me, since it was my birthday and not George's. It was quite an eventful party, and it took place in our backyard. My father hired a magician to perform tricks for everyone. I'm going to take like a 5-minute break right here because my throat really hurts. I'm going to go get some water, some more water, and I'll be right back, okay? I'm back. I'm back. Okay. So yeah, if you got any questions, I can answer them. If not, I guess we'll just thank you. Yeah. So yeah, if you got any questions so far, I can try to answer them. If not, we'll just sit here and chill for the next couple of minutes. Shoved a couple of ice cubes into this water bottle, trying to make sure it gets nice and cold. Are you happy? I'm fine. I'm fine. I meant like questions related to this, but I guess I'll answer any other ones. Damn, my throat hurts. Because keep in mind, parts 1 and 2 here are being filmed on the exact same day, like 30 minutes apart from each other. So my voice was kind of wrecked to start on this one to begin with. Ugh. I heard drinking warm water helps your throat. Yeah, well, I don't like drinking warm water. The cold water's really, I think it's going to have the opposite effect. I think the cold water is going to soothe it a hell of a lot more than that. But yeah, I think after this stream is over, I'm probably going to work on some videos. Like, I'm not done with the best and worst Pokemon fan games Volume 2 script yet. But, find the cough drops. Nah, I ain't doing that shit. I'm just going to give it a minute. But yeah, this should tell you everything you need to know. Elliot Rodger was a massive fucking loser who expected the world to owe him. And then when he went out into the real world and figured out that no, the world doesn't owe him, he lacked the self awareness to try to improve himself. And it ultimately ended with him, killing 6 people. Ugh, shit. Monkey Jones went really into detail about this whole thing. Like, I I'm willing to say that Monkey Jones is to Elliot Rodger what Geno Samuel is to Chris Chan. You know, the guy who made the 60-part documentary on Chris Chan. Yeah, I'd like to think they're equivalent, just with different people. All right, I think I can keep going. 9 years old. My ninth year was very interesting, and I went through a lot of changes emotionally and intellectually. It was the year in which I matured to a point. Hey, I think the fans would like to know if you're going to start an OnlyFans. If anyone feels the need to want to see my cock and balls, maybe. uh, I don't know why anyone would want to. My ninth year was very interesting, and I went through a lot of changes emotionally and intellectually. It was the year in which I matured to a point where I could start observing the world more conscientiously. Before I turned 9, I was living life as a carefree child in a world that I thought was only good and pure. From this point onwards, I would gradually discover more about the world and society. We live in a society. I would face problems and frustrations that I wouldn't even think about before. My life would still be positive and bright, however, and I would live it to its fullest. Hold on, my dogs are pacing. Again, I'll be right back. Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. I just had to let them out. I tried to see if they had to go out to use the bathroom before I started the stream, but they didn't want to get up. So, of course, now they have to spring this shit on me. So, yeah. So, yeah, I'm gonna just watch them from the window up in my room, and once they come back on the porch, I'll go get them. Then we can continue, okay? Sorry about this. And there they go. Yo, come on. Yo, come on. Come on. Come here. Alright, that should get them out of my hair for a while. Okay, without any further bullshit, let's continue. Let's see here. I would face problems and frustrations that I wouldn't even think about before. My life would still be positive and bright, however, and I would live it to its fullest. The first frustration of the year, as would remain for the rest of my life, was the fact that I was very short for my age. As 4th grade started, it fully dawned on me that I was the shortest kid in my class. Even the girls were taller than me. In the past, I rarely gave a thought to it, but at this stage I became extremely annoyed at how everyone was taller than me, and how the tallest boys were automatically respected more. It instilled the first feelings of inferiority in me, and such feelings would only grow more volatile with time. This is something I never understand. How is it that he had such an inferiority complex, and at the same time was a raging narcissist who had delusions of grandeur and thought of himself as a fucking god? I don't get it. It seems really contradictory here. I desperately wanted to get taller, and I read that playing basketball increases height. Where the fuck did you read that? This sparked my brief interest in basketball, and I would play it all the time during recess and lunch in the upper. Most of the basketball courts were unused, so I would play it by myself, or with anyone who cared to join me. During my time at Father's, I would spend hours playing basketball at Father's basketball court, shooting hoop after hoop long into the evening. I also remember lying on the ground in the basketball courts trying to stretch my body as much as I could in between basketball sessions. When I played basketball at school, some boys would join me, and when they did, I saw that they were much better at the sport than me. I envied their ability to throw the ball at double the distance than I could. This made me realize that along with being short, I was physically weak compared to other boys my age. Even boys younger than me were stronger. This vexed me to no end. My 4th grade classroom was located in the center area of the school, and my teacher was named Mrs. Gill, who had an assistant named Mr. Devine. Devine, whatever the fuck. 4th grade was a strange year due to the emotional problems I would go through, and I didn't have as much fun at school as I did in previous years. In class, I sat near Keaton Weber, and I got into a few conflicts with him. We weren't quite enemies, but I disliked him intensely, and I would always consider him a foul prick. Sounds like you considered him an enemy. By nature, I am a very jealous person, and there's half your problem. Why the fuck do you care about what other people think about you? I will never get it. It must be a lonely fucking existence if you're trying to live for other people. Live for yourself, man. Come on. Be your own person. And at the age of 9, my jealous nature sprung to the surface. During playdates with James, sometimes he would have other friends over as well, and I would feel very jealous and upset when he paid more attention to them. Feeling left out, I would find a quiet corner and start crying. Oh, you little bitch. My mother and Kim were very understanding and did the best they could to console me. On the rare occurrence that my mother would have Maddie and Mo over for dinner, or if we would go to visit them at their house, Maddie often played with my little sister Georgia instead of me, and this too made me jealous. I remember all the times I cried when this happened. Jealousy and envy. Those are two feelings that would dominate my entire life and bring me immense pain. The feelings of jealousy I felt at 9 years old were frustrating, but they were nothing compared to how I would feel once I hit puberty and have to watch the girls choosing other boys over me. Any problem I had at 9 years old was nirvana compared to what I was doomed to face. Okay. He got it backwards, you know. Most of the time, it was because the boys went after the girls. Of course, you fuckers know this because, you know, you have more self-awareness than this. You know, it would be nice if, you know, the world was like that, where people had equal footing and they equally tried to shoot their shot. I think that would lead to a lot less lonely people. if you know, both boys and girls did that instead of like primarily boys. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I'm saying it's rarer. But you know, it's just, you know, how it usually is. Boys usually go after the girls, and usually vice versa is a rare occurrence. So if he was honestly waiting for that, yeah, he was going to be waiting a long time, and he should have known that. A few months into 4th grade, it was decided by my parents to change me and my sister's living arrangement yet again. This time we would be switching between mother's house and father's house each week. One week would be spent at mother's and the next at father's. This was a fair split. At first I wasn't so sure about it because I always disliked any change to my life, but I found it to be a better arrangement. This enabled me to spend weekends at mother's house during her week, and I was very excited about this. I had only ever spent weekends at father's beforehand. During Father's Week, I would mostly be looked after by our 2 new nannies, Rosa and Amparo. They were of South American origin and didn't speak much English, but they were very kind. Didn't want to ask you out because I was scared that you didn't like me. Yeah. Well, see how that worked out. I started to have intense conflicts with Soumaya. I hated the rules she imposed on me, which I believe she had no right to impose, as she wasn't my true parent. I hated how she would force me to drink milk every morning and a very foul-tasting soup for dinner. I made such a fuss about having the soup that she used it as a punishment. Whenever I did something wrong, she would force me to drink the soup. I once had a play date with Philip at father's house, and when I yelled at my sister because she was annoying us, Soumaya punished me by sending me to my room for an hour, embarrassing me in front of Philip. After this incident, I never had a play date at father's house ever again. This conflict with Soumaya started a trend in which I would love being at mother's house and dread the weeks that I had to spend at father's house. On top of the conflicts with Soumaya, father was rarely there, as he was always out of town for his work. After spending a nice week at mother's house, I would cry when Sunday came and I had to go to father's on Monday. I would then spend the entire week at father's house looking forward to going back to my mother's. I remember those Mondays when my mother dropped me off at school for the first day of Father's Week. I felt so sad and I cried when I saw my mother's car driving away. Of course, I would hide the tears to avoid embarrassment at school, but I would feel miserable for that the whole day. I always had a pleasant experience during Mother's Week. She always arranged playdates for me because she knew I was too shy to initiate them myself. She always made everything fun. On weekends after dinner, we would have treat time, where she would bring out a box of candies for me and my sister to choose from. I had a lot of playdates with Philip, and through Philip, I also played with his brother Jeffrey, who was 2 years younger than us. You already fucking established this. While Philip was calm and mature, Jeffrey was the complete opposite. Jeffrey Blozier was wild and boisterous, which often brought a lot of fun to my playdates with Philip. My mother once had a party at her house and invited all of our family friends. James Ellis came over, and so did Philip and Jeffrey. It was the first time I saw all of them together, and it made for an interesting experience. I got a bit jealous, however, when Philip and Jeffrey seemed to respect and pay more attention to James than they did to me. While we were playing on my Nintendo 64 and I was competing against James, they rooted for James, which really upset me. Yeah, God fucking forbid you're not the center of attention for 5 fucking seconds, Elliot. As my 4th grade year approached its end, my little 9-year-old self had another revelation about how the world works. I realized that there were hierarchies, that some people were better than others. Of course, I was subconsciously aware of this in the past, but it was at this time of my life, at 9 years old, that I started to give it a lot of thought and importance. I started to see this at school. At school, there were always the cool kids, who seemed to be more admirable than everyone else. The way they looked, dressed, and acted made them cooler. These cool kids, as I called them, included Keaton Weber, Matt Bordier, Michael Ray, Trevor Bourget, Zalman Katz, Jesus Christ, that's a fucking name and a half, John Joe Glenn, and a few more. They were cool, they were popular, and they always seemed like they were having a good time. The peaceful and innocent environment of childhood where everyone had an equal footing was all over. The time of fair play was at its end. Life is a competition and a struggle, and I was slowly starting to realize it. Hold on. A little bit extra light, I think will help a bit. When I became aware of this common social structure at my school, I also started to examine myself and compare myself to these cool kids. I realized with some horror that I wasn't cool at all. I had a dorky hairstyle, I wore plain and uncool clothing, and I was shy and unpopular. I was always described as the shy boy in the past. But I never really thought my shyness would affect me in a negative way until this point. This revelation about the world and about myself really decreased my self-esteem. On top of this was the feeling that I was different because I am of mixed race. I am half white, half Asian, and this made me different from the normal, fully white kids that I was trying to fit in with. I envied the cool kids, and I wanted to be one of them. I was a bit frustrated at my parents for not shaping me into one of those kids in the past. They never made an effort to dress me in stylish clothing or get me a good-looking haircut. Wah, 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 wah. I had to make every effort to rectify this. I had to adapt. My first act was to ask my parents to allow me to bleach my hair blonde. I always envied and admired blonde-haired people, as they always seemed so much more beautiful. You see, this is what we call in the business foreshadowing. Yeah, that plays a big part later. My parents agreed to let me do it, and Father took me to a hair salon on Mulholland Drive in Woodland Hills. Choosing that hair salon was a bad decision, for they only bleached the top of my head blonde. When I indignantly questioned why they didn't make all of my hair blonde, they said that I was too young for a full bleaching. I was furious. I thought I looked so silly with blonde hair at the top of my head and black hair at the sides and back. I dreaded going to school the next day with this weird new hair. When I arrived at school the next day, I was intensely nervous. Before class started, I stood in a corner, frantically trying to figure out how I would go about revealing this to everyone. Trevor was the first one to notice it, and he came up to me and patted my head, saying that it was very cool. Well, that was exactly what I wanted. My new hair turned out to be quite a spectacle, and for a few days I got a hint of attention and admiration I so craved. My interest in Pokemon faded away at this time. In 3rd grade, Pokemon was considered cool and everyone was playing it. Towards the end of 4th grade, I found out that everyone was growing out of Pokemon, and the only players who played it were the geeky kids. I heard some kids joking about how lame Pokemon players were, and I decided it was time to quit. Again, he's living for other people. Dude, just like what you like. Why the fuck do you care? Why the fuck do you care about these nobodies who won't be in your life forever, would think? Fuck them. They fucking suck. Whatever, to each his own, I guess. I talked to James about this, and he was still interested in Pokemon, so I gave him my Charizard card as a gift, and as an act of my resignation from the game. Pokemon gave me some really happy and memorable experiences, but it was time to move on. It was only time to move on because you thought you would be cooler for doing so. Then I started to notice that all the cool kids were interested in skateboarding. I had never even ridden on a skateboard before, But if I wanted to be cool, I had to become a skateboarder. I expressed this to my parents, and my father was glad that I was showing an interest in an active sport. He took me to the store Val Surf on Ventura Boulevard to buy me a new skateboard, and I was fascinated by all of the different choices. I settled for a red Val Surf branded skateboard, and they took it down from the wall and built it for me. I was thrilled to have this new skateboard and the possible chance it gave me to be a cool kid. It was time to start practicing. I found it very hard to even ride on it at the beginning, and I spent many hours outside trying to get the hang of it. And that was that. I was now a skateboarder, though not yet good enough to reveal myself as one to the kids at school. It was the start of an obsession to copy everything the supposed cool kids were doing. Yeah, I remember when I was a young kid, and Tony Hawk games made me really into skateboarding as well. I'm pretty sure my old skateboard is still in my garage. Probably water damaged to shit from how much I left it outside in the rain. It's to the point where like the wood would probably fall off the second I tried to ride it again. But yeah, those were good memories. Those were good memories. And then the Tony Hawk remakes came out like I think last year. And yeah, those are pretty cool. Those are pretty cool. Yeah, skateboarding's pretty cool though. I like it. I mean, I haven't done it in years, but I like the sport. It's one of the only things I watch X Games for whenever it comes on. I just figure, you know what? I'll check out the skateboarding section, see how that's going. Yeah. Part 3. The last period of contentment. Age 9 to 13. Fourth grade ended, and once the summer started, I took a vow to mold myself into the coolest kid I could possibly be by the time 5th grade began. I anticipated the approval of the other cool kids would have of me once I reveal myself as being similar to them, and I looked forward to it. After about a year and a half of living in the house on Hatteras Street in Upper West Hills, my father decided to move into an even better house. This time, all of us spent a day looking at open houses together as a family. We went with a real estate agent and examined some beautiful homes around Woodland Hills. My favorite one was a 3-story house on Llano Drive in the Woodland Hills Heights, the most prestigious area of Woodland Hills that bordered Calabasas. It didn't have a pool, but it had a sloping backyard almost 3 times as large as our current one. The house had 6 bedrooms, and I took an intense liking to one particular bedroom that had its own bathroom and personal balcony. My father showed extreme enthusiasm about possibly buying this house, and I became obsessed with getting that particular bedroom as my own room. When I brought it up with Father and Soumaya, they said that the room would most likely be Georgia's because it was closer to the master bedroom. They said that I would get a bedroom downstairs, one without my own bathroom or balcony. I was furious, and I threw a huge crying tantrum. Here we go again. Soon enough, Father went ahead with the decision to buy this house. I made a big deal about the possibility of not getting that lovely bedroom I wanted, and I kept sulking to Father and Soumaya about it. When they finally moved and the first week of Father's at his new house started, I was very anxious. But then, as we entered, Father and Soumaya surprised me and revealed that they decided to give me the new room I wanted. I was so happy. I danced and leaped with joy all over the house, and then I went to my new balcony and looked out at the beautiful view of Woodland Hills for an hour. Okay, so they indulged his tantrum, and they wondered why he became so entitled. Such a fucking mystery! After the move to this new house, Father would never move again, and he still lives there to this very day. I would have many important experiences there for the next decade, both good and terrible. I needed a skateboard for Mother's house too, so my mother took me to Val Surf and bought me a gray Val Surf skateboard. What? What? What was stopping you from bringing the one from your dad's house to your mother's house? I don't get it. A skateboard's not that big. I would use this skateboard much more than the red skateboard I had at my father's house, since I had all of my playdates during Mother's Week, and Mother would make more of an effort to indulge in my new interest, eventually taking me to skate parks every weekend. I became very excited about my new hobby, and I shared it with James Ellis and Philip Blozier, my two main friends. I wanted to get them interested in skateboarding as well. It was tricky to get James into it, but he soon got his own skateboard, and we would start skating together around his neighborhood. As I now considered myself a skateboarder, I wanted to dress in the clothes that all the cool skateboarders were wearing. My mother took me to Val Surf once again, this time to shop for new shirts. I picked out a few that had the logos of skateboard companies on them. Later that day, I put on one of my new shirts, and I was thrilled to start going around in it. I felt cool. At Father's house, I was introduced to a new nanny who would be living with us. Rosa and Amparo left back to their home countries a few months before we moved house. This new nanny was an African-American woman named Tracy. She had a very fun personality, and I always had a pleasant time when she looked after us. She was able to drive, unlike my previous nannies, so she would be the one who would always pick me up from school during Father's Week from that point on. Uncle Dan had a quarrel with my father, and he was forced to move out. I would never see him again after that. Tracy would, in a way, replace Uncle Dan as the lodger who would live at Father's house. Early in the summer, Father forced me to attend summer camp at an elementary school nearby our new house. This school was Bay Laurel Elementary School in Calabasas. I hated the prospect, and I vehemently protested it. The last thing I wanted to do was spend my coveted summer at a school where I didn't know anyone. I was starting to like going to Father's house a lot more after moving to our lovely new house with my exquisite new room, but this decision of Father's made me dislike my weeks there again. At Mother's house, I had it my way more often, and that's how I wanted to live. He was so close to an epiphany there, but he was too up his own ass to realize that him having his way all the time was not a fucking good thing. I hated having to go to camp during the summer, and I was miserable at the start, but a couple weeks into it, I made friends with two brothers named Thomas and Tyler. On Mother's Week, I spent more and more time practicing skateboarding, and I had lots of play dates with James where we would skateboard together. We also had a lot of fun playing Nintendo 64 games, such as Donkey Kong 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, James Bond GoldenEye, and many more. He also got me interested in collecting Beanie Babies. At first I thought the thing was very lame and girly, but we used them to fuel our imagination and have mock battles and wars with each other. It was our secret hobby that we told no one about. I was relieved when summer camp ended, and once it was over, my 10th birthday arrived. I had been on this world for a decade, and what a decade it was, full of discovery, fun, and happy adventures. I can't say the same for the following decade. I didn't have a party for my 10th birthday, and I believe I celebrated it during Mother's Week. We went out with James and his family to a restaurant in the Palisades. Let's see here, how long have I been doing this? 55 minutes, alright. Gonna take another water break. Jesus Christ. Alright. 10 years old. I was eager to re-bleach my hair to a fully blonde color after the disastrous failure of my previous attempt. This time, Soumaya took me to the right salon, and they gave me a short haircut and bleached all of my hair blonde. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt an intense level of satisfaction. I went to James' house as soon as I acquired my new hair color, and the look of surprise on his face when he first saw me gave me a good laugh. A couple of weeks later, my hair started to grow and my black hair would show at the roots. But the blend turned out to suit me well. Allie, hey, what's up? And this would become my hairstyle for the next year. Mother took me and my sister on a short vacation towards the end of the summer. We drove up the 101 freeway to Ventura, where we stayed at the Holiday Inn, which has now been replaced by the Crown Plaza. I found the hotel to be comfortable and luxurious. It was located right on the Ventura Promenade, a beautiful walkway along the beach that led to a long pier. At this stage, so what's going on? Yeah, this is, on Twitter, I promised, for when I hit 100 subs that I would read Elliot Rodgers' manifesto, My Twisted World, and that's currently what's going on. We're about 2 hours into that. It's gonna be split up into a bunch of parts, obviously. I'm not reading, like, the full, 10 or 11 hour thing. But, yeah, we're, 2 hours into it. At this stage, I was very enthusiastic about my new interest in skateboarding, and I took my skateboard with me. I enjoyed practicing on my new skateboard all along the Ventura Promenade. During this trip, my mother took me to my first skate park, which was called Skate Street. It was humongous, and I was awed by all the towering ramps. I attended a beginner's class, and the instructor taught me the basics of riding on these ramps. I was absolutely terrified at first, but by the end of the class, I was able to go up and down the smallest of them, and I had a blast. When we got back to the hotel, we had a nice room service dinner, then the three of us watched the movie Finding Nemo on the hotel television. It was a lovely little trip. Before 5th grade started, I went with my father and Soumaya to a dinner party at their friend's house. I forgot who these friends were, but it was a nice house in Beverly Hills. There were lots of guests, and I did what I usually did at such dinner parties. I sat around eating snacks and talked with my sister, sometimes going to father and asking for a sip of wine. During this party, I found myself having a conversation with father, Soumaya, and one of the party guests, a boisterous middle-aged man who I can't recall the name of. Father and Soumaya were talking about how I just turned 10 years old, and we discussed life and what the future had in store for me. This man we were talking to, he patted me on the back and told me that I had a great life ahead of me. With a grin on his face, he told me that in the next 10 years you'll have a great time. A great time. I had no idea what he meant by that. I wasn't even thinking about my future at that point. I was living in the moment. Now I know what he meant. Childhood is fun, but when a boy reaches puberty, a whole new world opens up to him. A whole new world with new pleasures, such as sex and love. Other boys will experience this, but not me, it pains me to say. That is the basis of my tragic life. I will not have a great time in the next 10 years. The pleasures of sex and love will be denied to me. Other boys will experience it, but not me. Instead, I will only experience misery, rejection, loneliness, and pain. Jesus fuck. This is a certified Linkin Park moment. Crawling in my skin. In all seriousness, what a whiny little bitch. At that moment in time, I didn't think much about this man's comment. I don't even remember who he was. But after those 10 years have passed and I've experienced what I've experienced, I can't help but think about that moment. If only I knew what was in store for me right then and there. It was time to begin 5th grade. It started out excellently. My teacher was named Mrs. DeMart, and she would always be very kind to me. For the first week of 5th grade, I was at Mother's house. I considered myself to be very cool by now. I had gotten better at skateboarding. I had blonde hair, and I dressed like a skateboarder. I felt great anticipation for what the cool kids would think of me once they saw my transformation. To my disappointment, no one really cared. They were all in their own worlds. I don't remember any kids showing recognition of my new coolness. Eventually, I was regarded differently than I was in 4th grade, which I became content with. The cool kids talked to me more, and I started hanging out with them during recess and lunch. When Father's Week came, I felt frustrated because I didn't have enough cool clothes there, and it took a while for me to get Father to find the time to buy some for me. Mother always got me what I wanted right when I wanted it. At Mother's house, all of my needs were met with excellent precision, whereas at Father's house, there would always be a time delay because Father and Soumaya had less time for me and paid less attention to me. Fuck you, rich kid. Fuck you. Shortly after my 5th grade year began, my mother decided to move out of the red house to a small house in Woodland Hills. This new house was located on Topanga Canyon Boulevard near Demet Street. Father's house was just up the hill from there, so it was practically walking distance to Father's house. I would miss the red house, despite its smallness and the fact that I had to share a room with my sister. I had some very good times there. This new house was more convenient. It was still a 2-bedroom house, but one room was big enough to be split in two, and so by having a wall built in the middle, my sister and I each got our own room. As I got better and better at skateboarding, my mother made an effort to take me to a skate park every week. By now, skateboarding wasn't just a sport I was doing to copy the cool kids. I was truly interested in the sport. I even had hopes and dreams of becoming a professional skateboarder. That became my life goal. I loved skateboarding so much, I pictured myself doing amazing tricks in front of a cheering crowd, just like I saw Tony Hawk do in some videos. I pictured the admiration on their faces, and it was awesome. Hold on, gonna take some water real quick. The skate park my mother took me to was Northridge Skate Park, and she would take me there every Friday. Northridge Skate Park was an average-sized outdoor skate park with fine wooden ramps. First, we would have dinner at the Northridge Mall, then I would sign up for the 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. session at the skate park. I usually went alone, but after a few weeks of going, I made a few acquaintances there, and people knew me. This became a Friday tradition during Mother's Week. On the following Saturday, James usually came over for a sleepover. We would play Nintendo 64 games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Donkey Kong late into the night. And then on Sunday morning, Mother would take us both to Skate Lab, an indoor skate park in Simi Valley. James had become really interested in skateboarding too, or so I believed. I was always better at it than him though, and I liked it that way. This was the way every weekend went during Mother's Week, and I had the time of my life. Excuse me. I was so interested in skateboarding that I took my skateboard trick-or-treating for Halloween. My costume, of course, was myself as a skateboarder. We went to the Lemelsons for a nice dinner and then set out to collect our candy. It was quite tricky to hold a bag full of candy while skateboarding, but I had fun. I remember some teenagers seeing me on my skateboard and saying, "Why didn't I think of that?" Ha! That was gratifying. For Christmas, my mother bought me the new PlayStation 2. More like the PlayStation 2 fucking Extreme! I love that video. I had been wanting it for a long time, and when I unwrapped the present and saw the box, I felt so elated. Beforehand, the only video game console I played was... This is weird. It goes somewhere. The only console I played was the Nintendo 64 and the Game Boy, if that counts. The PlayStation 2 was much more advanced in graphics, and it amazed me. When Mother announced that I would have to share it with my sister Georgia and that I can't keep it in my room, My excitement turned to indignation, and I threw quite a tantrum. Bro, just be glad you got one. You fucking baby. After crying for a bit, I calmed down and settled to sharing it with Georgia. She wouldn't be using it much anyways, I told myself. Even after getting a PlayStation 2, I still played my N64 a lot because I loved the games I had for it, and I had an emotional attachment to it. The N64 was the first video game console I played, and it would always have a special place in my heart. Yeah, Ali, for context, um, after I'm done streaming here, look up Elliot Rodger on like Wikipedia or something, or the 2014 Isla Vista shooting, either or. You'll get the context. One day during winter break at Father's house, Father and Soumaya went out for a few hours and left me and my sister with Tracy. When they came back, they had a little puppy with them and announced that it was our new pet. It was mainly a present for Georgia. Georgia had been desperately asking Father for a pet puppy for the last year, but I didn't think he would actually go through with it. I was so shocked that we now had a dog. I was always afraid of dogs when I was little, and I never imagined having one as a pet. The only pets I've had previously were my turtle and iguana, who both died within a year of acquiring them. Georgia was given the choice on what to name the puppy, and she named it Lucky. I thought that this was a very lame and stupid name. When I returned to school after the winter break, I noticed all the cool kids had another interest, hacky sacking. It was a simple sport consisting of kicking a beanbag into the air as many times as you can without it landing on the floor. They all had hacky sacks, and they would spend recess and lunch kicking them with each other, since skateboarding wasn't allowed on school grounds. I didn't have a hacky sack, but I decided that I needed to do something about that. My mother took me to the store PacSun, where I got a hacky sack with an orange and green design. When we got home from the mall, I started practicing. I remember struggling with it at first, but I spent the next few afternoons concentrating on getting good at it. I spent many hours well into the night practicing in my backyard. Once I was able to kick the hacky sack properly, I made a big deal of the fact that I was now interested in it. I would go up to the group of cool kids and show off my skills, and I played with it every single minute I spent outside during school time. The upper playground was rebuilt over the break, and there was a brand new playground to play on. I always loved brand new things, and the new playground was quite engaging. On the very first day that we were allowed to use it, I played tag with Philip Blozier, Addison Altendorf, Bryce Jacobs, and a few others. I never really became good friends with the so-called cool kids. I would see them more as competitors than friends. During recess and lunch, I mainly played with Philip and his little clique, which consisted of Addison Altendorf, Kevin, and TJ Tassoni. I made a few 4th grade friends through hacky sacking, though I forget their names. I mainly played with them during recess and lunch. One day, after I stayed an hour after school at the upper, I was hacky sacking with them, and I kicked my hacky sack up onto a roof. It wasn't a first hacky sack, thank goodness, but I was quite fond of it and I was sad to lose it. I wonder if it's still up there. No, it would have been cleared away by now. I still refused to have any play dates when I was at my father's house due to the incident with Soumaya in 4th grade. Because of this, my father and Soumaya became concerned that I didn't have any friends. Soumaya forced me to befriend some of the neighbors' kids who lived down the road. They would often skateboard outside of their houses. I was aghast. The prospect of walking up to a bunch of kids who I didn't know and asking to play with them was terrifying to me. They were cool skateboarders, and that made it even more intimidating. Of course, I wanted to be friends with them and join in on their fun, but I was too scared that they would think I'm weird. I've always been shy by nature. Soumaya didn't understand this, and she gave me no choice in the matter. She sent me out of the house and wouldn't let me back in until I introduced myself to them. I tried pretending that I was playing with them, but instead I would hide in a quiet street corner. To my surprise, Soumaya somehow knew I was doing this, and she came to confront me. She then got Tracy to take me down to where the kids were playing and pushed me into it. Tracy went up to the kids and asked if I could play with them. I felt embarrassed and timid, but they welcomed me. I always had the subconscious preconception that the coolest kids were mean and aggressive by nature, which is quite true, and I was shocked that these kids were being nice to me and letting me play with them. After a fun afternoon skateboarding around the streets of Woodland Hills, I regretted not befriending them sooner. They went to Woodland Hills Elementary School, the school my sister would soon go to. A couple of weeks later, Soumaya forced me to befriend yet another group of Woodland Hills kids. This second group lived nearer to my house, and they weren't skateboarders. However, they liked riding bikes and scooters. One of them was a... Kate, I'm looking back at chat. Why are you asking Mike if he's starting an OnlyFans? That was a joke. That was a joke. The second group lived nearer to my house, and they weren't skateboarders. However, they liked riding bikes and scooters. One of them was a black boy named Lucky Radley, who I thought was very nice at the time. I found it strange that he had the same name as my dog. He was a 4th grader, and he would later go to the same middle school as me, where he would become an object of my extreme jealousy and hatred. Looking back, I can't believe I actually played with him as a friend in my father's neighborhood. In the spring, Uncle Johnny and the cousins came to stay at Father's house. Cousin George bunked with me in my room, and the two of us became instant friends. I haven't seen him since my last trip to England, and back then, we were little kids. I enjoyed having a friend to play with on a daily basis without having to arrange a play date, and the week that they stayed with us was great fun. I once took them along to play on scooters and skateboards with the neighbor kids. And we also went to the beach a lot. Indeed, it was a great week, and I was sad to see them go. I looked forward to seeing them again when we were to go on our vacation to France and England in the coming summer. After Johnny and the cousins left, Soumaya's mother Khadija came to stay for a few months, and I was made to share my room with her. Because Father had converted 2 of the guest rooms into his office, and Tracy was staying in the downstairs room. I had an extra bed in my room, so I suppose it made sense to them. I was a bit annoyed with this at the start, but I bonded well with Khadija, so I soon became okay with it. Kate, why are you weird and crazy? She was like a 3rd grandmother to me. I mean, technically she's your step-grandmother, so it makes sense. My mother attained tickets to the red carpet premiere Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. We received 4 tickets. Georgia was old enough to go, and I persuaded Mother to let me give the 4th ticket to James. I was awestruck by the time the movie ended. It found it to be absolutely phenomenal. I think he meant I found it. Whatever. James and I talked about it for hours afterward. My life at school was starting to become mediocre again, and I became frustrated. Shut up, I may be weird, but I'm not crazy. You gotta keep telling yourself that. I didn't have a regular group of friends who I always played with. I was like a nomad, moving from group to group and trying to fit in with each one, but never fully integrating. I feared that the cool kids didn't regard me as one of them, and even Philip's clique never considered me one of their core friends. Despite all of my attempts to be cool, I didn't feel as if the other kids respected me as such. I was still quite the outcast, as I always will be. Boo fucking who. You poor little baby. Let me play you a sad song on the world's smallest violin. My social life changed somewhat when Mrs. DeMart announced that we would have new seating arrangements in class, and the process of deciding on who sits where was up to us. Our class consisted of tables that seated about 5 to 6 people, and when our name was called randomly, we could choose anywhere to sit, meaning that everyone had a chance to sit with their group of friends. I didn't have a core group of friends, so I was thrown into a state of panic. Originally, I was sitting at the table where Philip's clique sat, but all of their names were called before me, and I was booted from their table. At this point, I just chose to sit anywhere, and ended up sitting next to John Joe Glenn. Matt Bordier and Danny Diani also sat at our table. These were kids who I regarded as cool, so I was content with sitting with them. I never really interacted with John Joe Glenn that much in the past. He was one of the biggest jerks of the school, next to Trevor and Keaton. We quarreled a bit at the start, but soon enough we started socializing, and I talked with him about some new games I got for my PlayStation 2. We became friends when John Joe suddenly asked me if he could come over to my house. I felt happy that he asked me this. It would be the first play date I would have without my mother arranging it for me. This would spark a fun new friendship that would last well after 5th grade. The random seating arrangement next to John Joe was the best thing to happen to me in elementary school. Despite my struggles to be regarded as cool and my obsession with attaining such recognition, 5th grade was my favorite school year in elementary school. I played with more people than I ever did in previous grades. I was less shy, I wasn't a dork, and I had an awesome time learning how to skateboard and hacky sack. It was memorable. It was memorable year filled with joyful experiences. Forgot the A. I didn't want the school year to end. Once 5th grade was over, I will have to go to middle school, and the prospect filled me with anxiety. My little innocent mind always looked at middle school as something far in the future, when I grow up. I didn't want to grow up. I was enjoying my life as a kid right at that moment. Excuse me. I didn't think about the future. Kids in my class told many rumors of middle school life that filled me with fear and sent a shiver through my spine. Even through watching movies and TV shows, I got a glimpse of what was in store for a middle schooler. There was talk of girls, and how it would soon be cool to be popular with the girls. Girls were like completely foreign creatures to me. I never interacted with them. I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't expected to. Shit. In elementary school, boys played with boys, and girls played with girls. Sure you're not. Remind me how many times you've watched Hamilton on Disney. Oh, Jesus. That was what I was used to. That was my world. I heard stories of how boys are expected to start kissing girls in middle school. Such things overwhelmed me. I tried to dismiss it as much as I could and enjoy my life in the present moment. My school arranged a camping trip for the entire 5th grade class before graduation day. At first I didn't want to go because I would be away from my parents for 5 days. Something I was never used to. I was afraid I would get too homesick. I never spent more than one night away from my parents. On the rare occasion that they had to go out of town for a few days and left me with a nanny, I would cry at night. What a little bitch. Again, I feel like I'm going to say that a lot. My teacher, Mrs. DeMart, came up to me one morning before class started and persuaded me to go, saying that the graduation trip was something I wouldn't want to miss. It would be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and after some hesitation, I agreed to go along. The fuck are you talking about? They seem to be giving out graduation days like fucking hotcakes before the 12th grade would even start. You had one at kindergarten, and now you're having one at 5th grade. Once-in-a-lifetime experience, my ass. I forgot exactly where this camping trip took place. It was located at a special camping retreat somewhere in the forest to the north of Los Angeles. It was very secluded, a small village of cabins and tents surrounded by wilderness and hiking trails. For the trip there, I decided to go with my friends Bryce and Charlie in a car instead of taking the school bus with everyone else. This was much more comfortable, and I was glad to have snagged a spot in the car with them. Everyone was assigned to groups of 5 to share a cabin or a tent. I was originally placed in a group with Charlie, Bryce, and a few others, but that group was given a tent to sleep in. I was appalled by how drab and uncomfortable the tents looked. I wanted a cabin. So I went to my teacher and asked to be transferred to a group that was sleeping in a cabin. She placed me in a group of some cool skateboarder kids, including Michael, Sam, Trevor, Matt, and Stefan. Only a few times, yeah, okay. I felt a sense of pride to be part of this group. During the daytime on this trip, the whole 5th grade class participated in games, outdoor activities, nature hikes, and barbecues. It was great fun. Nighttime in the cabin was like having a sleepover with 5 people. And it was a new experience that excited me. Before bedtime, Michael Ray took out a magazine that had pictures of beautiful model women, and all of the boys gathered around and looked at them. So, even at the early age of 10, boys were starting to be attracted to the female body. I didn't understand this. I hadn't yet reached that stage. It's definitely under 7. Okay. I pretended to be interested just so that I wouldn't appear uncool. All of those boys probably lost their virginity by 16. Damn them! Oh my god, giving a whole curse you, Perry the Platypus vibes. Jesus Christ, that's a fresh fucking reference. Jesus. The trip ended up being so fun that I didn't cry at all about being away from my parents for so long. And finally, it was time to graduate from elementary school. Before the ceremony, our whole class watched a video full of footage of school life throughout the year. I saw a few glimpses of myself caught in the footage, and I felt gratified. My life at Topanga Elementary School was a blast, full of memorable experiences and wonderful times. I dressed in a nice shirt with a tie for the ceremony. All of the 5th graders lined up and walked down an aisle through the center of the auditorium, with the audience of parents and siblings on either side. When I saw my parents, they looked so proud of me. Each student had to walk up to their teacher on the stage and receive a graduation award. We weren't required to give a speech, to my relief. I would be too nervous to talk in front of an audience. The graduation theme song was Time of Your Life by the band Green Day. Jesus, that is so fucking cliche. One of my favorite bands. Whenever I would hear this song again, I would think about that glorious day, and the memories would make me feel an extreme sense of nostalgia. In the afternoon, there was a graduation party at the top of Topanga Community Recreation Center, a lovely place that provided a view of the whole valley. My mother took me to have dinner at the sushi restaurant Kabuki afterwards. It was just me and her. As we sat down at the restaurant after all the excitement, I took a moment to fully ponder over the fact that elementary school was all over. It was done. I felt so accomplished and proud. I was happy, things were good. But along with that happiness was a feeling of sadness that I will be leaving all of those experiences behind. Best day of my life was my graduation song. What, you had a 5th grade graduation? Where the fuck was I? Somewhere around here. I felt so accomplished and proud. I was happy. Things were good. But along with that happiness was a feeling of sadness. I would be leaving all these experiences behind. A whole chapter of my life had just passed and a new one was beginning. That day was such an extraordinary day. A day to remember, a memory to cherish. For the first few weeks of summer, Mother arranged playdates with various friends and acquaintances I made from Topanga Elementary, including Trevor Bourget, Matt Bordier, Charlie Converse, John Joe Glenn, and Philip Blozier. It was interesting to have Trevor and Matt over. I never thought I would have play dates with them. 6th grade. My elementary school went up from K to 6. Oh, okay. Matt was one of the coolest kids in school. He was a skateboarder and a baseball player who seemed to garner respect from everyone. I envied him during elementary school when we were friends. I would deeply envy and hate him later on in life when I find out how much success he would have with girls. Again, I repeat, as children we all play together as equals in a fair environment. Only after the advent of puberty does the true brutality of human nature show its face. Excuse me. Excuse me. Shit. Life will become a bitter and unfair struggle for self-worth, all because girls will choose some boys over others. The boys who girls find attractive will live pleasure-filled lives, while they dominate the boys who girls deem unworthy. Matt Bordier will go on to live a life of pleasure. Girls will throw themselves at him, and I will go on to be rejected and humiliated by girls. At that moment in time, we were just playing together as children, oblivious to the fact that my future will be dark and his will be bright. Life is such a cruel joke. You big fucking baby. My mother continued to take me to Northridge Skate Park every Friday, and I also attended a skateboard camp at Pedlow Skate Park for a couple of weeks. At this camp, I bumped into one of the kids I played with around my father's house. I had been trying very hard to get better at skateboarding, but when I saw that there were boys a lot younger than me who could do more tricks, I realized that I sucked. I was never good at sports or any physical activity, and when I discovered skateboarding, I thought that finally here was a sport that I could excel in and even become a professional at. It crushed me a little inside to see that I was a failure at skateboarding after more than a year of practicing it. I could never master the kickflip or heel flip. All I could do was ollie jump and ride down a few ramps. I saw 8-year-old boys at the skate park who could do a kickflip with ease, and it made me so angry. Why did I fail at everything I tried? I asked myself. My dreams of becoming a professional skateboarder were over. I felt so defeated. Because of this, my interest in skateboarding slowly faded away during this summer. James had recently told me that he was no longer interested in the sport, so I no longer had him to skateboard with anyway. I just decided to forget about it for the moment. James's family moved to a new house in Malibu. The house was owned by the Lemelsons, and they were staying in it temporarily. Mother took us there a few times where I adventured with James in the wilderness area that surrounded the house. We would often go to a small plaza in the center of Malibu. There was a playground there, with a few shops and restaurants surrounding it. It was time for my 11th birthday. I was at Mother's house and just decided to have a small play date for my birthday. I invited James over, along with another kid who I had befriended at the Woodland Hills Recreation Center. My mother made a small cake, I blew out the candles, and that was it. I was 11 years old. I think that'll be a good place to leave it off. The next time I stream, it's not going to be this, but I definitely plan on finishing this as a promise for hitting 100 subscribers. Thank you all for that, by the way. That was really cool. But, yeah. So, fucking hell. My throat is absolutely dead, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.